What I want to talk about for a little side note is what happens when all of this beauty and all of this joy and transcendence and connectedness, what happens when it gets broken? Because it seems as though the most powerful forces in the universe, when they get broken, it goes really bad. A fire catches in a dry field and it can destroy thousands of acres. A nuclear reactor melts down and the whole city had better be aware of what's happening in that place. It's interesting to watch the effects of sex out of context as well. I got to see this very powerfully and personally when I used to work with college students. We would make a trip every spring break down to Daytona Beach in order to do outreach events, and that is a place where the desire for sexual attraction and casual encounters was blatant, even crazy at moments. And the longer the week went, the more we would talk to person after person who was filled with pain and regret from the encounters that they had earlier in the week. Their search for transcendence was as strong as ever. But even though they got what they asked for, they hadn't found what they were looking for. The same thing happens to you if you're at Daytona Beach or experiencing a one-nighter in a bar or by yourself with a screen that tempts you. Because when you strip sexuality from its context, you get sexuality without spirituality. Instead of hope, you wind up with despair. Instead of bonding, you have tearing. Instead of fullness, you find emptiness. Instead of connection, you find disconnectedness and a profound sense of being alone. It leads to shame and regret, sometimes even hatred. I'm struck by the passage in the story of David when David's son Amnon raped his half-sister Tamar, and immediately after it happens, it says, "And in that moment he hated her even as much as he had loved her before." His emotions went completely on their head. And this kind of emotional mess follows people who strip their sexuality from their spiritual connections. And it's a downward spiral of the pain and the regret and the search for the transcendent and fulfilling it in illegitimate ways and more pain and more regret, and it just keeps going downhill. This drive for biology and pleasure devoid of spirituality is what stokes the human trafficking industry. And you all already heard a little bit of that from Tim and from Hannah as they spoke this morning. It's why this is prevalent in our backyard and across the globe. It results in enslavement and manipulation and despair and grief. But the Christian viewpoint says, let's rise above this, guys. Let's look higher. Let's look to legitimate ways to fulfill these desires.